This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome back our two celebrity guests. They are the hosts of the Never Seen It podcast. Please welcome Betsy and Trent.
Why, thank you.
I don't think I've ever been called a celebrity before. I feel so fancy.
You have kind of a celebrity background.
I have a following.
You perform on stage. Yes. Star of stage and screen.
In my own head, anyway.
Yes.
Very good. Well, we're glad to have you back. For any of those who didn't see our post-Oscars reaction show, we live streamed that one, and you guys were a part of that. But this is your first time on the main feed, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that also means you are subject to our opening questions. Let's say new guests to the show have to answer 3 sets of questions, and you guys can tag team whichever order you would like. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you love movies.
Ladies first, Betsy.
Oh, thank you, Trent. Well, we are married. We've been married now for, hang on, math, coming up on 12 years. And it's one of those things that I watched a ton of movies my entire life. And then we started dating, and the conversation turned to, what do you like to do in your free time? And what movies do you like? And the laundry list went on and on and on with this guy. So it became something we did together as far as exploring movies that we haven't watched, exploring movies that we have, and just bonding over them. When we're not doing podcasting, I work in an office. It's not very exciting.
Yeah.
But as he alluded to, I also do perform locally in a theater group. So I do sing and dance. If you want to call it dancing, that's very generous in my mind. But yeah, it's a fun time. And just movies are my recreation,
Yeah.
I guess, my entertainment.
When I met Betsy, she was living by herself in her apartment, and she did not have internet in her apartment. She did not have cable TV or any other kinds of entertainment except for the Netflix DVDs and the library DVDs.
Yep, and my combination DVD VCR.
That's right. So that's pretty much her background. I also work in a corporate office. I work from home, so I never leave this house. So, I mean, my background with movies, I watched a lot of movies when I was a kid. I never really went to a lot of movies, though, and I kind of fell off after I left school. And I didn't really start watching a lot of movies until I met Betsy, where she started to introduce me to a whole lot of movies, including the one we're about to watch.
So you didn't see it as a kid like 500 times like I did?
No.
Neither did I. I think the first time I saw this movie was not that long before I showed it to you. Yeah. I'd maybe seen it once or twice by the time you got to see it.
Yeah, and I never really sought out, like, what are the important movies? And I just didn't care. Like, I had other hobbies. I had other things going on. I worked, 12, 15 hours a day sometimes at my old job. And I just didn't have time for such things. But after we started our podcast, I have grown a deeper appreciation for just the art form, if I want to be snooty about it.
No, I can definitely sense that. We talked about it last week with our guests at the time, but I think I've grown much deeper as a movie fan or a film fan as I've done this show. So this is our 5th season, and I couldn't tell you what framing or blocking or cinematography really was to watch, or maybe some of the editing. But as you start to do video editing yourself, you really notice things.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And I would say, right, I think because we do this very analytically, I watch movies differently now. I would, if I sat down to watch a movie right now that I've never seen, which is kind of the entire purpose of our podcast, is watching movies we haven't seen. I don't think I can do it any other way now.
Even if we're not recording for the podcast.
Yeah, I have to do some kind of analytics, even if it is, a stupid movie.
I can definitely feel that 1,000%. It has its positives and negatives. You can only watch a film that way, but you can also only watch a film that way. And sometimes that's great for the really good ones, but on the stupid level where you just kind of need to just experiencing it.
Yeah.
Not so much. So our second question, and the dreaded one that everyone hates, what is your favorite movie and why?
You're going to make me go first again. Okay,
Yes.
fine. I genuinely do not have an answer for this question. I truly do not. If you ever listen to our podcast, you will know I do not like ranking things. I do not like making lists and putting them in order. I'm too much of a middle child, and I don't like to play favorites. It is just a personality trait I experienced my entire life.
I force her every year at our year-end award show to rank the movies, especially with our Oscar movies. We have to rank them from 1 to 10 every year.
So that being said, there are movies I would say I have seen in well into the double digits, and there are movies that I will constantly recommend. He said one before we started,
Yep.
just because it's one he's heard me talk about a lot, and that is the movie Charade from the 1960s, starring the fabulous Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant. It's one I didn't see until I was
Walter
in high
Matthau.
school. And Walter
Yep.
Matthau, yes.
Is the heavy.
And I didn't see that until I was probably in high school, even though it was one my parents had on the shelf in our house, probably my entire life. And I just kind of got really into the mystery in it. It's funny. It's dramatic. I have introduced so many people to this movie, and I continue to do it. If somebody's like, I need a movie recommendation, that's where I begin. That is my first one, because I find that so many people have never watched it, and that is so underrated. He had never watched it. He loves this movie now.
Yeah. And I don't like a lot of older, movies from that era. I'm not really into that.
You don't know about them. You
Right.
don't know where to begin, so they intimidate you, I think.
I think so. I just don't know what to expect going into that era of film. But the more we do our podcast, the more we are finding out, oh shit, we really like movies from the 1970s.
Which is exactly the opposite opinion of what we thought we had.
Right.
Not an unusual hot take.
It is a great movie. The best Hitchcock film not made by Hitchcock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. The final question in our...
Well, hang on now. You didn't
Oh,
answer the
excuse
question,
me.
Trent.
I need to answer.
You off the hook.
All right, I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'm gonna say two things. I make a distinction between my favorite movies and the best movies. I would say the movie that I would say is the best movie I've ever seen is Children of Men. We covered that for one of our Patreon shows where we covered our absolute favorite movies, and it was a weird situation where I saw that movie for the first time. I was on a quasi date with a gal. We rented it from Blockbuster. We came to her apartment and we halfway watched it and halfway talked to each other throughout it. And I couldn't really get into the movie. And it wasn't until maybe years later that I finally rented it again, or I got it somehow, and I watched it and I absolutely love it. And every single time I watch it, I see something new.
But you were also more into the movie than you were the date, weren't you?
Yes, definitely. So that's definitely the best movie I've ever seen. My favorite movie, though, the one that just gives me the giddy feeling every time, it makes me happy every time I watch it, and it's a very untraditional movie because it's only about 30 minutes long. We have a movie poster of it behind me. It is the movie Kung Fury. If you've never seen the movie Kung Fury, I implore you, go to YouTube. It's free. Just watch it. It's fantastic. It makes me so happy every time I watch it.
Okay. That is
Okay.
There's a
unique
spectrum
choice.
here.
Yeah.
I have never heard anyone voice a 30-minute film, let alone Kung Fury. So you
Have
will
you
be...
seen it?
Have you seen it though?
I have not.
Oh my God. Okay. Should I give the synopsis?
The short version the short version. It is an homage to cheesy 80s action movies about a renegade cop who is also a chosen one ninja because he was struck by lightning and bitten by a cobra at the same time. And
it is the most ridiculous movie.
It is
premise.
over the top 80s action, but they made it like 12 years ago.
It's fantastic. You have to go and watch it. It's, like I said, it's 30 minutes. I mean, what, like half of it is just the ending credit scene.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
There's an original song sung by David Hasselhoff
for this movie.
Yes.
There.
I was going to
that did
say
it for me.
Yes.
Yeah, this seems exactly like the type of movie that my German uncle would be sending to me on WhatsApp on a lark and then asking me to watch, much like the Stormtrooper dad jokes video he sent me this afternoon.
Okay.
What do you call a Jedi with one eye? Or without an eye, excuse me.
Jed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, boy. Yeah, there were like 12 of them in there. And some of them were decent and some were just, they're dead.
What do you call a cow without legs?
Ground beef.
Right on.
Wow. This has gone downhill quickly. All right.
Anyway, Kung Fury. Ask for it by name.
I'll have to watch that one. I'm on vacation, so perfect.
30 minutes to spare.
30 minutes to spare. That's
right.
It's always on YouTube. It's just free. It used to be on Netflix.
It comes and goes from Netflix, but it's always on YouTube.
Yeah, I did see the YouTube, just kind of Googling it here during the course of the show, but it is available on like Apple or Amazon for like $2. So
do it.
You might even be able to buy the full thing for $2. They might be giving it away.
Yeah. Like if you don't, for some reason, have access to YouTube where you are, I guess.
Is there such a place?
It's just free. It was put out for free by the production company, so it's meant to be free.
Final question. What makes a good movie for you?
I'll go first.
Oh, he's ready this time.
I will volunteer. I would say the things that we really dig into on our show, the things that really get my interest up in a movie is character and storytelling. We analyze. I never thought that we would get so deep into analyzing characters in movies, but that's really what I love doing. And not just analyzing what they're doing in the movie itself, but extrapolating the character and asking the questions: why did they do this? What would they do in the future? What was their past?
The motivations,
everything. We really like to dive deep into character and just how story is being told to the audience, why they're putting some things at the beginning of the movie, why do some movies take their storytelling and break it up into flashbacks and whatever else. That's really the stuff that really gets me. And I love unique ways of storytelling.
Yeah, and for me, I think I appreciate the art of it, like the way it looks, the way it sounds, when you really kind of, and I think this has been developing as we've been doing the podcast, where you can really appreciate all of the elements that went into it. But for me, what it really boils down to, I think, is how it makes me feel. Like if I want to watch a movie that makes me laugh, I watch a comedy. If I want to watch a movie because I'm in a terrible mood and I want to sulk in a corner, I watch something that's, going to make me angry or it's going to make me cry. And I can name movies for those equal emotions. And, there's comfort movies and there's, things that I want to share with you. When we were looking at, when we were getting to know each other, I told you about All the President's Men because he's like, I'm into politics and I'm into this. It's like, well, then you should probably watch this movie. And that's another thing I enjoy doing is just finding what other people already like to say, okay, well, if you like that, you might like this.
Betsy is the cinema whisperer. She knows exactly what to recommend to people. And 9 times out of 10, if not more, they love it.
Wouldn't that make me like a cinemalier? I'll workshop that.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not bad.
See, he likes it. You don't have to live with me, though. Like, I love watching something like a classic 70s, political journalism thriller, but then I also watch, dumb rom-coms because it's like, I want something that doesn't make me think very hard. I love one we haven't watched yet, Girls Just Want to Have Fun from 1985. It's about a high schooler who just wants to dance. Why? Because it's fun. I like movies, so sue me.
Oh, don't say that to a lawyer.
All right. So let's get to the actual film at hand for the evening. Tonight, for our 226th episode, we revisit the number one essential journalism movie, All the President's Men, from 1976. Directed by Alan J. Pakula, written by William Goldman, music by David Shire, cinematography by Gordon Willis, starring Dustin Hoffman as Carl Bernstein, Robert Redford as Bob Woodward, Jack Warden as Harry M. Rosenfeld, Martin Balsam as Howard Simons, Hal Holbrook as Deep Throat, Jason Robards as Ben Bradley, Jane Alexander as the bookkeeper, Stephen Collins as Hugh W. Sloan Jr., Ned Beatty as Martin Dardis, Meredith Baxter as Deborah Murray Sloan, Penny Fuller as Sally Aiken, Penny Pazer as Sharon Lyons, Lindsay Krause as Kay Eddy, Robert Walden as Donald Segretti, F. Murray Abraham as Sergeant Paul Leeper, David Arkin as Eugene Baczynski. Recognition for this movie, All the President's Men, was wide released on April 9th, 1976. On a budget of roughly $8.5 million, it would gross over $70 million worldwide. It was the number 6 grossing film in the US and Canada of 1976. It received near universal praise upon its release from critics and audience alike, and would be nominated for 8 Academy Awards: Best Picture, Director for Pakula, Supporting Actors for Jane Alexander, and Film Editing, winning for Best Supporting Actor for Jason Robards, the first of his back-to-back wins. Adapted Screenplay for William Goldman, his second win after what other movie, Dad?
Boy, I'm drawing a blank.
Raindrops keep falling on my head.
Oh, okay.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Sundance Kid.
Art direction and sound. It became one of the 7 films to win Best Picture from 3 out of 4 major U.S. film critics groups: the L.A. Critics, National Board of Review, New York Critics, and National Society of Film Critics. Can you name any of the other 7 films?
So say that question again.
Okay, so this film became one of the 7 films to win Best Picture from 3 out of the 4 major U.S. film critics groups: L.A., New York, National Board of Review, and National Society of Film Critics.
In specifically 1976, or
no,
just in
time.
general? Oh,
at
gosh. The Godfather?
No.
Part 2?
Nope. In fact, let's see here. Only 2 out of these 7 have actually won Best Picture.
Oh.
Network.
Not a bad guess, but no.
Rocky.
Nope.
I like that we're
Let's do
sticking
all 76.
every movie from the 70s.
Well, you might get one if you go with most of the 70s, but it might take a little while.
I don't even know how
Deer Hunter.
long these organizations have been around.
Nope.
Ben-Hur.
Nope, not quite. So the first one on the list is Nashville. You have Terms of Endearment, Goodfellas, Pulp Fiction, The Hurt Locker, and Drive My Car.
So these are newer. New, certainly newer than I was guessing.
Okay,
Yeah, this
newer
century,
within
anyway.
the last 50 years, yes. In 2007, Entertainment Weekly ranked All the President's Men as one of its 25 powerful political thrillers. In 2010, it was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. In 2015, The Hollywood Reporter polled hundreds of Academy members, asking them to re-vote on past controversial decisions. Academy members indicated that, given a second chance, they would award the 1977 Oscar for Best Picture to All the President's Men instead of Rocky. The film has been recognized by the AFI on the following lists: AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills at number 57, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains with Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein as the number 27 heroes, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Cheers at number 34, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition in 2007 at number 77. So it dropped 20 spots, I think. All the President's Men currently holds a 94% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, an 84 score on Metacritic, and a 4.2 out of 5 on Letterboxd, which is interesting that it seemingly has a higher Letterboxd score than it does a Metacritic score. That's rare. Letterboxd people are just so hard on movies. But as we do each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
Well, as I have told you on many occasions, I read the book the year before the movie was released.
Nerd alert.
Yes, I would have been 10. I don't know. Just fascinated me. Anyway, I didn't see the movie because I didn't go to movies at that time. I had to rely on my parents. But I think about 78, 79, it happened to be on HBO because I convinced my dad that the world would not be able to evolve if we did not have HBO, since he was a movie lover. And he agreed. And then we watched a lot of movies on HBO. I don't remember if I watched it with him. I probably didn't, since he voted for Nixon, was a huge Nixon fan up until about 1984, when all of a sudden he shocked me and said he was voting for Mondale. And then
so he was the one.
That's a turn.
Yeah, he was like, wow. I mean, I'm like, this is a guy that used to pride himself on voting for Goldwater. And then all of a sudden it just flipped. Okay. So anyway, but that's probably about the time I would have seen it, was the early or the late 70s when it would have been on HBO.
Well, and as you can tell, my experience with this film is owed all its responsibility to the nerd that raised me.
You were also required to read it when you were 10, read the book.
No, not quite. I mean, I was reading history books when I was 10, but it wasn't this. And it certainly wasn't John Dean's biography. But I can't remember the first time I saw it because I've seen it probably 30 to 40 times in my life. I mean, I'm 34. I've probably seen it more times than years that I've been alive. So that's just kind of growing up in the Duncan household. Certain films you just kind of are introduced to early and you have no idea what is going on in half of it. Even now, now that I've gotten a lot more of the history behind Watergate, do I understand half of what's going on? But the film is actually okay to watch, even if you don't have all the background on it, because it's more about, it was one of the great choices by Goldman, was to focus on the shoe leather aspect of reporting than it was in the nitty gritty of the actual story itself. And so to see these guys going around trying to curry favor on the phone with various people, trying to look up stuff in a way that really ages poorly when you have Google.
Yeah.
It is very endearing.
I said the thing that aged this movie the most was that, number one, you could get people's phone numbers. And number two, they would answer the phone.
Yeah, phone books, rotary phones, having to look for a phone book in order to find somebody's number that you can't just, search immediately. Finger typing.
Yep.
Yeah, the hunt and peck.
That's what Woodward did.
That's what they all had to do. That was typewriting.
Well, most people knew how to 10 key to some extent, but they didn't have time for that. I watched this movie. He took crazy notes. He was using a pencil half the time.
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember having in the first couple of law firms we would maintain phone books from all over the country just for that situation of looking up people in phone books if we needed to.
Well, that you guys are also of the profession that you used to keep an entire library just for all the laws that you needed to know.
True, and I remember using the law library a lot.
Oh, I can tell you, I love, I don't love everything about law school, but I love the fact that I can just search a case and I don't have to go find it in a book.
You save so much time.
Ooh.
It is very, very convenient. But anyway, both of your relationships to this movie. How did this manifest?
So I told Trent, and we said this before we started recording, I'm going to be in the minority of this conversation because my background is certainly not a person who knew all the ins and outs of what Watergate was and investigative journalism. I was one of the people that saw the 100 years, 100 movies list when I was all but, I think, 13 or 14 when they put the very first one out. It was a summer special on CBS, primetime, and I didn't have cable, and that's when I watched. So I went to the internet, what it was in those days, and I printed out the list, and I would just work my way through it. And I think I probably watched this one either when I was in high school or sometime in or right after college. And I remember really liking the movie as a movie, but I had no context for the rest of it. And it's not until many years later, as I've experienced more media and been married to this guy, that I've really gotten exposed to what these guys were doing and why it was important and how this all went down, to the degree that he and I actually went a couple of years ago. Woodward and Bernstein came to our town for one of the colleges. They do a symposium every year and they invite a guest speaker, and they had both guys on one night and the tickets were free. So I was like, yeah, we're going to that.
Fascinating conversation, by the way.
But yeah,
I would imagine so. Those guys have been around for a lot. I mean, yes, they are known for Watergate, but Bob Woodward has been writing presidential, like, tell-all books for as long as I can remember.
There's another one coming out this year.
On Biden?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that makes sense.
On this most recent era, yes.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that makes sense. He writes one seemingly every term.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's now joined up with one of the other writers or political writers from the Washington Post, simply because I think he's realized he needs to pass the torch, and he's getting a little lacking in energy to do the projects the way he used to do them. But
well, I think he's really good at asking the questions and being dogmatic about it, but he's not necessarily in the detail writing of everything or taking the most profuse notes in the way that he probably used to. But I mean, he's still pretty sharp when it comes to asking specific, like, biting questions.
my wife bought me for Christmas a couple of years ago Masterclass, which is an online. You can actually find the app available through most of your smart TVs, Roku, Fire Stick, etc.
This isn't an advertisement for Masterclass.
This is not a paid placement.
Yes, I know, but Bob Woodward does a class on investigative journalism that's like 32 half-hour segments. And
Nice.
I watched them
That's
all.
a lot.
They are utterly fascinating. I think I filled
You would
like
to do that just to watch it.
Probably.
I know. I think I filled 6 pages of notes in my journal of things he suggested and how you go about doing things and the ethics of doing certain things. And it was just fabulous.
And I suppose coming from his era of journalism, what he would say in a class like that might not jive with what journalism, how it is taught these days, but it would be fascinating to have the conversation between somebody coming out of J school right now and going through this class with him and having it be completely different. But anyway, my history with this, Betsy showed me this movie when we first started dating, probably the first year we were dating. And as she said, I am into politics. I'm into journalism. I was fascinated with journalism when I was in high school. I almost went down that path. I almost became a journalist. I did not do it. One of Betsy's friends actually has worked for pretty much every major journalistic organization you can think of. She worked for the Post. She worked for the Times. She's worked for CNN,
BBC, I think.
Yeah, she is. Every time I get a chance to talk with her, I always want to pick her brain.
Yeah, she's gone to like every convention, like presidential convention for the last I don't know how many years.
Yeah, she's been to inaugurations. She's been to States of the Union.
So you love when we hang out.
Yes. So I have a long history with just following journalism as an art form and just keeping up with the news, let's say. But as far as this movie itself, I agree with you, Tom, that the movie itself is best when it is just about the journalism, the getting down and dirty and doing the work and knocking on doors and making cold calls, showing the audience how it's done. And it's not about the scandal. It's really not, because when it is about the scandal, it's all in the background. When things are happening on the news and people are watching the televisions in the backgrounds of these scenes, it's all in the background. It's not what the focus is, because the focus is these guys doing the job.
Yeah, I think it was a great choice to try and go in that route. And I mean, that's really what the film is about, is the journalistic aspect. I can't tell you until, I mean, I'm 34 now, to date myself a little bit, but until maybe the last 8 or so years, where a lot of the examples of Watergate kept being thrown and bandied about during at least the first Trump administration, let's say first for right now, and subsequent all the reporting that was coming out during that time frame as well, the revisits of the Watergate narrative of the time, I didn't have as deep a grasp. And then you start getting other shows that are behind the background of this. I can't remember. There was Gaslight or Gaslit was one that I thought was actually fairly decently done, although it wasn't like one of my top shows of that year. We had the White House Plumbers recently, another background show, but knowing who all of these guys were and the names and like E. Howard Hunt, an absolute insane person. Understanding
one podcast I would recommend, if I don't know if this is the one you're trying to think of, Slow Burn.
Oh yeah,
is fantastic. I would say after I watched this movie, not nearly as many times as you,
but he's seen it more than me now.
I've seen it plenty of times. So after that, it very much piqued my interest, and this is one of the periods of American history that I'm the most fascinated with. The first being the American Revolution, followed by this period right here from 1960 until about 1975. So as a history buff, I really like to dive pretty deep into this stuff, and listening to podcasts and reading articles from the era is just really how I got into this entire thing.
And hearing from people who experienced it in real time.
Yes, that is the most fascinating stuff, is hearing from those people.
Yeah, my mom grew up in Washington, D.C., so she would have been in the city while this was happening. She's from Arlington, so she was always around politics, and my grandpa worked for the government, and then they moved to South Dakota, and I think that was probably a few months. I think they moved in 1974, so I think it was a few months before Nixon resigned.
So, I mean, there's a lot of information that's now like risen to the surface as this has become like a hot topic over the last, let's say, 8 to 10 years. But until then, I still enjoyed the movie because you didn't need to know who Bob Haldeman was in order to enjoy the movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of names and they're going down a lot of roads. So you really have to pay attention to follow the flow. But as they start putting the puzzle together, and as the paranoia and the threat of what is going on, as they realize what story they have, and even they start getting affected by, what do you mean? Why is everybody following us? And they're being chased out of a dark garage, but there's nobody there. Like the thrills start building. And it's well made and interesting. And like I said, when I first saw this, I didn't know anything about Watergate.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating thing to see this movie now in 2024, where a person who doesn't know any kind of context to that era, they don't know any names except for Nixon.
We're 50 years removed from Nixon resigning.
Yeah. So somebody watching this movie now is going to have a completely different reaction than somebody watching it in the first 5 years after it came out, because people in that era knew all these names, or at least people who paid attention to the news and politics knew these names so they can put it together in context. Now you can't do that. Not without having a little bit of knowledge going in.
No, I mean, forgive me, Dad, if I may ask, but there had to be, with how often the news was operating, a certain level of knowledge that was held by the audience at the time that we don't have in a modern context.
Yes.
I mean, even with the dearth of information and new shows and presentations of new styles and perspectives and such that has been going on, there's a lot of characters involved in this that I would guess have been, for the most part, lost to the history books. Pretty much everybody knows that Nixon resigns and Jerry Ford takes over, but that's about as far as it goes.
No, a lot of people knew the context, and it was not hard to find. And if you read the New York Times, Washington Post articles, a lot of times were republished or reposted through the AP or UPI in your local paper and such. And a lot of people had a lot of background information. In fact, I'm not naming names, but if you were in 5th grade and your grade school teacher's trying to teach about Watergate and you keep interrupting him and telling him he's wrong, eventually he kind of lets you do a synopsis of it.
Oh, well, that was nicer than I thought this was going to go. I thought you were going to go, you would get sent to the principal's office.
No, he was a pretty good guy. He kind of said, okay, so then you'd go ahead and do it. And so I did. I just feasted on this stuff because it was so in my wheelhouse as a kid. I just was so into presidential politics.
And I mean, circulating back to what you guys said earlier about what makes a good movie for you, the characters in this are just so fascinating from a granular level, not just the people covering it, but if you get into the true history of Watergate, when you get to Howard Hunt and the actual plumbers themselves and John Mitchell, the characters in this are just fascinating, even beyond Richard Nixon, who by himself could be, voluminous amounts of things written.
I can comment. I actually bet Chuck Colson.
I know you said that on an original episode.
Did I mention that? Okay.
Yes. And you went on a very large advertisement for the prison ministries.
Ah, okay.
I would like to just kind of expand upon that when it comes to these characters. One thing that they kind of touch on in this movie when he's meeting Deep Throat for the first time, he basically says, forget about the White House, and everybody who works in the White House is just the smartest people in the world, and they all deserve to be there because they are the smartest people in the world. When in reality, they're just a bunch of dumbasses who got appointed to these jobs by people who didn't know any better or didn't care.
They found themselves in positions of power.
Exactly.
And then they made dumb mistakes and got caught and wondered how that happened.
Yeah. So you can't really just look at people in government and just automatically assume that they are qualified to be there. At least, for some administrations anyway.
We won't name names.
No, and it's across the board. It's not a political thing. It is not a partisan thing. Some people who get appointed to political office don't deserve to be there.
They have no business being in politics.
Business being in whatever position that they're in.
Well, that's just because they were the third cousin of somebody's dentist.
Or they were the 4th runner-up during the primary.
Or they managed to get 5 independent delegates out of a certain area of the country that were necessary to get the nomination.
Speaking of that, we're from South Dakota, so we know a thing or two about the Watergate candidate that was being investigated.
Right.
Because, of course, McGovern, famously from South Dakota.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's like our one connection to this movie that I'm like, I know that name.
Yes.
Everybody else, I get a little bit lost because it's so many names throughout this movie.
Yeah.
And apart from, the main like 4 or 5, there's so many secretaries and businessmen and people for the committee, and they abbreviate things like the committee to re-elect the president is just the committee to re-elect. I'm like, what? The first time I watched this, I was like, what are they talking about? The committee to re-elect.
Oh, and the acronym was just precious.
Yeah. Creep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always thought it was, really on the nose.
In retrospect, George McGovern flew something like 40 missions for the 8th Air Force in bombers over World War II. Richard Nixon was basically a officer in the Navy who did like administrative work in Washington. Ooh, and who was the hawk and who was the warrior?
Well, yeah, McGovern couldn't even win his own states.
No.
Yeah.
Now, the way that we started this conversation was talking about this being the essential journalism movie. This is the one that everybody points back to, and all other journalism movies seem to be compared against. It is unquestionably one of the most influential films on a particular industry that we probably have. But if I were to place some level of criticism, does it have a positive or negative effect on the way journalism has been conducted? Because we have an entire class of modern journalists that have been raised on this movie and this example.
I think it's truthful in the way it used to have to be done. Like guys in a library digging through thousands of cards and just calling random numbers because somebody said something about something, and they just keep calling and calling and calling, and it takes years, literal years of their lives to get to the actual story and to back it up with the research and the facts.
And to have it be kind of dirty in the way that, sometimes you come up with nothing. You spend an entire day looking through all this stuff at the Library of Congress and you come up with nothing.
And it's unglamorous, boring work. So I think there's probably elements of this that people watch this and go, wow, journalism, it's so interesting. It's like, no, it's really not. Very dry, meticulous work. And you take your story to your boss that you think you're really proud of, and he goes, it sucks. Do better. Get another source. Yeah, you don't have it yet.
They really
have it on the 3rd page.
They spend a lot of time here portraying these two guys as being very, very deep into this story, but you have to have the editors come in to poke holes in it and tell them you don't have it yet.
Come down a notch.
There is such a high bar in order to get something in the paper. People have no idea what that was like. I don't think it's anywhere near the way it used to be now, because especially in political news right now, everything is anonymous sources. Prior to Watergate, if you used anonymous sources in a printed story, there had to be a very, very good reason.
I'm going to take the position that it's both good and bad, which is from the journalistic point of view. When you look at another journalist film, which would be The Spotlight, it was all about the story and digging, okay? But there were a lot of journalists, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, who were like, hey, I just need to find a scandal. If I can find a scandal, then I can get some movie star to play me in the film. And that aspect turns it into something bad. Because I think there was a lot of shoddy journalism in the late 80s, early 90s. It was all about sensationalism. I think that sensationalism has become less mainstream, but still relevant. And I think it's ultimately ended up being emphasized in another movie, that being Network, which is sensationalism ultimately prevails.
We watched that for the very first time for our podcast.
Last year.
Yeah. And a movie that was considered a far-fetched satire in 1976 reads very differently now.
It's a horror film now.
Yeah.
I would take that there are a lot of negatives to how the film has conducted its legacy, not at fault for the film, other than making a really good movie. I mean, you have to take out, you mentioned going through the cards at the Library of Congress. They do the pan out shot, but they condense what was likely several hours worth of work looking for stuff into the span of 5 minutes max?
Yeah. Because it would be really boring to watch these guys doing it for real for like 3 hours.
And they took the first 9 months of this investigation, or what eventually, was going to take years, as you mentioned, into a 2 hour and 10-minute movie. I mean, because you have to condense a lot of that information, you can't go through it in an episodic level, that you kind of leave off at a fairly odd and abrupt ending.
Yeah, it just cuts off right at the inauguration, and then that's it. You know what happens, and you get, which I think is brilliant, you get the typewriters typing the AP alerts saying all of these different headlines that happen in the coming years after this initial story is written.
And the dates jump around. That was the part that I thought it was in like a processional fashion, or like a timeline
Some
fashion.
of it is, yeah.
But they end with the big one being Nixon resigns, which is the takeaway that everybody has, obviously, is the most seminal event of this whole thing, is that you got the top guy. But it condenses a lot of things that otherwise would be, all this boring, painstaking work. And then it celebrates these guys for their tenacity, their dogmatic nature, and makes them into these like legendary status people that by name association alone, you end up with the reporters becoming almost bigger, or at least on the same level as the story. I mean, one of the things that this movie doesn't portray well, even though it does mention it somewhat, is how much the Times was actually still involved and was very much like their rival at the time. But in the retelling of this story, because the film is more important to portraying the final say of what Watergate was and kind of crafting the narrative, Woodward and Bernstein, especially how it's seen in the film, are like the only two purveyors of the truth behind Watergate somehow.
Yeah.
And that's not factual really at all. Yeah. But now they are almost as like synonymous with Watergate as Richard Nixon is.
And one other thing that they kind of do in this movie is they spend a lot of time just trying to convince their editors that it is a story. And they have these editor meetings where they're deciding, okay, what are we going to actually put in the paper? And they have there's one guy, I don't know which section of the paper he works on, but they keep him over and they ask him, or he says, I don't actually believe the story. But then again, we've only got two guys working on this. The Times has their guys working on it. And it's just kind of a trickle. No other paper around the country are reprinting our stories because they don't believe it. I don't believe it. So what do these guys even have? Why are we spending all these resources on these two guys to just follow this one story that may or may not be true?
And the context that I appreciate that I didn't have in earlier viewings of this is we have since seen The Post, which talks about what is basically leading up to Watergate. And I didn't have any of that history of the newspaper of the Washington Post, in that in 1972, it was just expanding into a bigger market. And that's why Bernstein has been there for a little while and Woodward has been there less than a year, because they finally have the resources to do more investigative journalism and the history of the actual paper, and putting guys on stories like this,
creating it to be a national paper rather than just Washington, D.C.'s paper.
And these two dudes are hammering away writing, I don't know, they wrote dozens of articles. They wrote tons and tons of content about this and related stories as they were putting it all together. And
it wasn't just like the spotlight thing, like you said, one giant story that the entire team is working on. No, this is trickle after trickle after trickle, just things coming out that they're, as soon as they get it, they put it out in the paper. They just keep on working on the overall story.
So, Dad, are you ready to give some more background on the film? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. All the President's Men is a gripping account of two reporters, Bob Woodward, Robert Redford, and Carl Bernstein, Dustin Hoffman, who uncover one of the most significant political scandals in American history. Set against the backdrop of a tense and suspicious Washington, D.C., the film follows the relentless pursuit of the truth behind the Watergate break-in. Through meticulous investigation, careful sourcing, and dogged determination, they expose a cover-up that reaches the highest levels of government, ultimately leading to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. The movie is not just a tale of journalism, but a testament to the power of persistence and the importance of a free press in holding power accountable.
Thank you. Did you know? Redford and Hoffman memorized each other's lines so that they could interrupt each other in character. This unsettled a lot of actors that they were playing opposite, leading to a greater sense of authenticity. Did you know? Hal Holbrook was the first and only choice to play the shadowy informant Deep Throat. During pre-production of the casting process, Bob Woodward, while looking at the various actors' headshots and resumes, but not revealing Deep Throat's true identity, that being former Deputy Director of the FBI Mark Felt, insisted to director Alan J. Pakula that Holbrook was the best choice to play Deep Throat. Holbrook, in fact, bears a strong resemblance to Mark Felt. Holbrook originally turned the role down, thinking it would not be a significant part. However, Robert Redford came to Holbrook's house and convinced him to take the role, saying that Deep Throat would be the character that the audience would remember more than any other in the film. Did you know? The film introduced the catchphrase, "Follow the money," which was absent from the book or any documentation of Watergate. Did you know? Robert Redford felt that by casting himself as Bob Woodward, he was unnecessarily unbalancing the film. The obvious answer was to cast a star of equal weight. For that reason, he approached Dustin Hoffman at a Knicks game and offered him the role of Carl Bernstein. However, Dustin Hoffman was the second choice. Do you know who originally was approached to play Carl Bernstein?
I don't think I know that.
No, I actually don't.
Nope.
Al Pacino.
Interesting.
I would watch that movie.
But
The furious volley of typewriter hammers striking paper in the opening scenes was created by layering the sounds of gunshots and whiplashes over the actual sounds of a typewriter, accentuating the film's theme of words as weapons. This is also why the closing scene has a typewriter printing headlines with the sound of cannon fire from a 21-gun salute in the background. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 227th episode, we welcome back Adam Freed from Movie Archer to revisit yet another top film on our current list, and one of the few episodes that Dana was not on. Pulp Fiction from 1994, written and directed by Quentin Tarantino, starring John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Uma Thurman, Harvey Keitel, Christopher Walken, and Bruce Willis. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. All right, before we get too much further, let's turn it to our guest. What is going on with Never Seen It, and where can people find you?
Oh gosh, what are we working on right now? So we're actually going through what we call our decade series. This is something we started a couple of years ago, where whatever year we're in. So right now we're in 2024. We pick a movie, 64, 74, 84, and so on. And we've done that the last few years. So the threes, the twos. And we try to find a movie that is like quintessentially from that year or has some cultural significance, or try to tie it back to that.
Or at least for that decade.
Yeah. And so we've gotten through the 80s, and we're about to hit the 90s as far as our recording schedule. I'm not sure when this episode is being released. It might already be out.
Yeah. So for 64, we covered Mary Poppins.
Because he had not watched Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins. For 74, we covered The Conversation, the other Francis Ford Coppola movie from 74.
And neither of us had watched that one.
Yep.
I still haven't seen it.
For 84, we did Footloose.
Okay.
Never seen it.
And then for 94, we're doing Reality Bites.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then the rest of them are a secret. You'll find out when you listen.
But yeah, that's kind of what we're going through right now. And then we're quickly getting to October, where we always do Never Scream It, which is we pick different spooky, scary movies, because we notoriously tell each other we don't like horror, but we're trying to expand our minds, expand our experiences.
Yeah.
And so every October is dedicated to watching things that we probably would never otherwise consider watching.
Yeah, and it's not always, hey, we're going to do a slasher movie. Hey, we're going to do a scary, bloody slasher, whatever. The kinds of movies that you normally watch in October. But 2 of the few years that we've been doing Never Scream It, we've covered Ari Aster movies. So we did Midsommar and we did Hereditary, which we loved. They were fantastic. So we're finding out the genres and we're finding out the types of these kinds of movies that we really like.
But yeah, if you want to go on this cinematic journey with us, we're on, I think, basically anywhere you can find podcasts.
Podcast services worldwide.
Never seen it
with Betsy and Trent.
I'm Betsy.
She's Betsy.
And he's Trent.
Glad you pointed that out.
Thank you.
And what are your social handles?
So you can find the Twitter handle at neverseenit_pod. You can find our personal things from that page. Instagram is Never Seen It Pod 1. We're on Blue Sky. It is Never Seen It. I think it's just Never Seen It on Blue
I think
Sky.
we got there early enough.
I think we got there early enough for that. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/Never Seen It Pod. We have 4 other shows about movies, plus some other extra bonus stuff that is just us messing around.
It's where we get weird.
Yeah.
Like, let's be real.
Yeah. The other shows all have to do with movies, but they all have a theme. Our first one of the month is always the Movie Club, which is our favorite movies of all time that we cover.
Our favorite movies as a couple.
Yeah. The second show is called Real Love, which is hosted by her.
Yeah.
And she subjects me to a whole bunch of different romance movies and rom-coms and other stuff that I don't normally watch.
Yes, I'm torturing him very slowly, but it gets better because we have a randomizer called the Wayback Machine, where we literally do not know the year we will be watching a movie from, and he hates not being in control of his destiny.
I like to plan out the podcast to make sure we know what we're covering.
But I limit his choices extremely in this one, and it is truly random. Like when people listen to it, it's not us like picking from a list or drawing from a hat. We have a wheel, and we spin a wheel. It tells us the year. The month is whatever month we're going into, and then we see what the movies were that were in the theater at that time, and we watch them. And we have watched some weird movies that we would not have picked.
Yeah, we watched, was it Ben-Hur?
We watched Ben-Hur.
We did
Escape to Witch Mountain
from the 70s. Yeah. We did Patton.
And then
we had never seen.
Yep. And then we're going to be doing Mr. Mom.
Yeah.
Which we have neither of us has seen.
Oh, that's a great film.
And then the other show is called Box Set, where we watch the entirety of a movie series. We did the entirety of the Magic Mike trilogy. We're about to finish the Mad Max trilogy. And we did the Dark Knight trilogy so far.
Yeah, there are 3 Magic Mikes. It's like Magic Mike, Magic Mike 2, and Magic Mike
Magic Mike XXL and Magic Mike's Last Dance.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, he loved Magic Mike XXL.
It's really good. It's really good.
You wouldn't have done it if I hadn't convinced you. If I hadn't found a way to make you watch Magic Mike.
The first Magic Mike is legitimately good. The second one is really fun, and the third one,
it's fine.
It's fine.
Well, when you're doing your horror films, if you haven't a film that you haven't seen before, the first horror film I ever watched, my babysitter had me watching when I was about 7 or 8. Was Rosemary's Baby.
Ooh, yeah.
We could do that one.
We might do that.
Neither of us has seen that one.
Yeah. One other one that we did for the Wayback Machine, we did not plan this. We watched The Omen a couple of months ago. It is fantastic. I had no idea that movie was that good.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't have picked it if we weren't like forced into a spot that said, here's your choices. Go.
The other one along that line, The Boys from Brazil.
Never heard of that.
Never heard of this.
And Laurence Olivier.
Oh, wow.
Gregory Peck was getting into some interesting work in that time frame.
Yeah.
Well, that was about when he was president of the Academy, I think.
It was towards the end, and what the premise is it was Joseph Mengele had survived, and he had taken DNA and implanted semen from Hitler and created a whole race of potential Hitlers.
And this is a Larry Olivier and...
Olivier was Mengele. Or no, Olivier was the investigator from Jerusalem seeking to find Mengele, and Gregory Peck was Mengele.
Obviously.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, it's...
Little
it's
revisionist history for you.
I think there's a reason I have not heard of this film before. Well, thank you very much. And for anyone that wants to find anything for you guys, we'll have everything included on the website as well as in the show notes for this episode. So let's turn our attention to Ask Dana Anything. We do have one audience submission.
Where's my music?
Although I don't have the imaging yet. You know how much work is going to go into doing the imaging the way I want it to be done? With all the 5-timers having a separate recording, a little audio clip to be able to do it and then sync that all up.
It's no wonder we have
He's becoming a diva.
Question.
We can always just stop the segment if it's going to go to your head.
Fine. It's not going to my head.
Okay. Well, anyway, we do have at least 2 questions submitted by an audience member, although, to be fair, as our most frequent collaborator on the Gmote podcast, is she really an audience member? And that would be my mother. So, number 1, what is your favorite vacation memory or memories with me? Doesn't say me, it's Thomas, but it would seem weird if I did it in the third person.
We had just had your sister, and so it was a few weeks later, and your mother was still off from work. So we went up to this fishing cabin up in northern Minnesota with your grandparents. And we went to Lake Itasca, which is the headwaters of the Mississippi River. And there's a spot where you can go, and literally the lake drains into a basin. And the basin then runs down, and that's the beginning or the headwaters of the Mississippi River. And Tom was about 3.5, maybe not even 3. And so I thought it would be really funny to have him walk across this basin so that he can say he walked across the Mississippi River. Except that he decided to sit down in the middle of the basin with his diaper on and everything. And it's ice cold water. It's hot, but I'm carrying him. He's sopping wet. His diaper is about the size of a beach ball. And we're trying to scramble around to find some sort of clothes to put him in. So we ended up going to the gift shop and buying the smallest sizes they had, which literally was a dress on him, was a small juvenile T-shirt, and putting him in that so we could get him home dry. So that's my favorite because I'll always remember that thing.
I think everyone should do a podcast with their dad. Because this is the stuff you get to hear about.
That's right.
Thanks, Mom. Okay, second question. What is your most favorite vacation you recall with your wife or family?
I have been to 2 places with her that I thought were phenomenal and that I wish I could go to again. One was Paris and one was Venice. I would have a hard time determining which of the 2 I enjoyed more. Paris, for all of the reasons you'd think. It was just, I had so thought that I wasn't going to enjoy Paris because, as Churchill famously said, God created a beautiful place on the earth, so he created France. And so he felt guilty, so he created Frenchmen.
Sorry to all of our French listeners.
So I thought I was going to hate it, but I didn't. I just really enjoyed Paris, and I got to see Notre Dame before it burned down. got to see the Eiffel Tower, have lunch in the Eiffel Tower, etc. And Venice was just absolutely beautiful. I never walked so much in my entire life. I think it was not uncommon to put in 15,000 to 20,000 steps a day walking through Venice because everything was on foot. There was no motorized traffic through the city, but it was just absolutely beautiful. St. Marco's Cathedral was gorgeous. Those are two of the memories that I really cherish, and I think back, and your mother and I had just a fabulous time, and I enjoyed spending it with her. Just create a memory that'll last me until I die.
Very cool. So, do either of our guests have any Ask Dana Anything questions? Otherwise, we'll move on.
I'll do a left field question.
Okay.
Just because it popped into my head. It's either you as a lawyer are the best or worst person to ask this question, but I saw a video of someone who said you should ask this of new coworkers to see if you can trust them. So I'm going to ask you, if you could commit a crime and you knew you were going to get away with it, what crime would you commit?
Identity
You knew
theft.
you were going to get away with it.
Identity theft. Do you know how much money you could milk out of identity theft? I've actually thought about how it would go about doing it, how I could get away with it.
Let's not disclose this here because
I told you, best or worst person to ask as a lawyer.
Yeah, you put way too much. I know the details of exactly what you're going to say, and given the amount of sensitive information that we hold in our firm, let's not go there and put it in public consumption for the world.
It's amazing what you can do by mail.
I understand perfectly, but I had, the years I spent driving, because when I did criminal defense work, I did a lot of high felony work around the state because there weren't enough lawyers who did what I did. And then when I stopped doing that and did Social Security law, which is what I do now, I had to do a lot of hearings and travel all over. And sometimes it would just be boring to listen to the radio or a book or something, and I'd just sit there and I'd think. And so I came up with theories and thoughts, and I worked it through my head. And boy, I would not want to be me.
I always tell people my sister has a PhD in forensic anthropology. So if I wanted to get rid of a body, like I actually genuinely know someone who could tell me how to do that.
I'm glad to be 2 states away.
Yeah. For a couple of cases I had to spend some time in forensic evidence and knew how to basically either avoid certain levels of DNA testing or manipulate it so someone else could be accused.
That's a lawyer with too much time on his hands.
Yeah, I know.
Also, we haven't mentioned it on this show, but we went to the same college. So the fact that you and I are both like, yeah, let's commit crimes. But not really. We're not endorsing crime.
How far apart were we, by the way?
A few years.
I think more than a few.
I think a few. We were not there at the same time.
I think there's like a 20-year difference.
We probably had the same professors.
Well,
yeah,
most likely.
I know. I'm trying to think, because I think most of the professors I had either retired shortly after I left, although I was on the not quite on the student committee to hire the government department, but had some, well, I won't get into it, but I had a quasi role. So a lot of those professors I knew in a lot of detail, as in the economics department and the history departments and art departments. And yeah, it was a great time.
But even I'm far enough removed now that a lot of the people who were there when I was are retiring or in some cases passing away.
Yes, I know. Every time I get the catalog or the magazine, I find more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for all of the questions and our audience participation. All the questions are available on the website, as is most of the notes for this particular episode. But if you have not been with us before, this is the point in the revisit episode where we skip what is normally our middle section. So you will not be getting any best performances or best scenes, best lines, anything like that here. We are just simply here to revisit our original scoring. If you would like all of that information, go back to our original episode. I believe it was episode 40 back in November of 2020. In fact, it was released on November 4th, 2020. I think that was a day after the presidential election at the time. And you can listen to all of our original content there. But 4 years later, we are here to revisit the original scoring. So, Legacy is up first. Our original Legacy score for this one was a 9.5, and that is roughly a measurement. Although at the time, I don't think we had started to separate the category between industry and audience like we do now. But it is roughly a measurement of how well this has held up in a legacy perspective in the years after this was released. So roughly from about 1981 to now, what is the legacy of this movie? So as I said, we had a 9.5 originally. Dad, did we get this right or wrong?
We got it right. I would say from an industry standpoint, I think we'd be at a 4.5. The film itself and the journalistic aspect of it, the ties, how Hoffman and Woodward were portrayed, a lot of that, the heroic journalist, I think, continues. It's become a long-standing trope within movie genre, and I think it continues. I think for the public, normally, I mean, most people probably have not seen the film, but I don't believe that but for the film, there were going to be a lot of people that were going to necessarily remember who Bob Woodward or Carl Bernstein were. I think they were memorialized in the fact that this was a classic big star film that continued to carry on. And so I think we got it right for the first time around, which was 9.5.
So I'm just slightly different than you. I agree that the industry perspective has roughly a 5, given that the fact that this is the journalism movie against which all journalism movies are measured against. It kind of is the archetype for all of that going forward. It's going to be pretty hard to knock off a 5 on the industry side of things. Where I think, and usually what happens in Legacy is where the audience comes in. And it's going to be really hard to prove to me that there's enough staying power with some of the younger audiences in this one. I know that all of us are probably aged out that we can't really communicate with all the like preteens and stuff. I mean, I don't really know how to communicate with somebody that's 16 years my junior at 18 right now, let alone anything else. But it's going to be pretty hard for us to be able to say, what the hell is Watergate? And for them to have a really intelligent answer, one that somewhat comes at this without sounding like you just pulled it simply from a textbook. Like even again, with the dearth of information and other perspectives that we've gotten in the recent years, that seems to be more aimed at people of either my generation or your generation, and people that are really attuned to history and journalism and political science and all this other stuff more than it is a general population. So I have it at a 4, partially on that background. I think that my point would actually lead somebody to think that I should be scoring this lower than that. The problem is that from an audience perspective as well, this is the defining story of Watergate. And it's so closely tied to how the audience perceives this entire political event, this major historical moment in American history, that it's really hard to knock it below a 4, even if we have some snotty teenagers that don't know what Watergate is. So I have a 9. So which of our guests would like to be first up on the chopping block?
I think I would echo a lot of what you just said, Tom, in that you can't replace the original. In that this defined what a journalism movie is. There might have been movies that have to do with journalists and whatever else, but this is the definitive. So from an industry standpoint, I don't think you can score this anything other than a 5. However, on the audience thing, I would go even lower. I would say if you're going to put a score on this, I would maybe even give this a 2 out of 5. The reason I say that is because there are so many other things that have supplanted not just this storytelling trope, but the story itself. I think there are so many other things that have just replaced the story that this movie tells in regards to not only the investigation that these guys did, but the overall Watergate story.
Okay, so you're sitting at a 7 then.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get our final last entry for a first initial offering number, and then we can start the debate.
Yeah, I think the industry number, it's kind of that thing about lists like the AFI, where the people who made it were people who were around in the 70s primarily when this movie came out. So they got the initial impact, and that has stayed with them. I think as time is passing, the journalism element is going to keep it ranked high. There are going to be people constantly saying, this is the movie. It's constantly going to stay between a 4 and a 5. I think probably a 4 is fair. I don't know if I really want to go higher than that. But I also think that, to your point, Trent, the reference that they might make as an example, there are other examples you can give now, which is going to lessen this as the first one. It might be the second one you start to name. And I also agree with you about the audience. I just think unless you're really into history or really into, if you're like a real cinephile, this is a movie you're going to be drawn to. I don't think you're just going to stroll up to a theater that's showing this movie and go, that's what I want. If you've never heard of this, if you had nobody telling you about it, if you're not kind of tapped into this world or one of these worlds, it's not going to have as much staying power. It doesn't mean it's a bad movie. I just think that as more and more and more time passes and people talk less and less and less about this kind of a movie, it's just gradually going to go smaller. I'm not going to go as low as you. I think I'll give it maybe a... Again, I told you at the beginning, I hate ranking things.
And yet you voluntarily came on a ranking specific...
I'm going to participate. I think I'll give this like a 3.75 just because, just to give it an arbitrary number. I think if you are not introduced to this movie by someone who loves it, it is much harder to just go and see this movie. Trent is a prime example of this. You had 20 plus years that you could have sought this movie out. And it wasn't until I told you should watch it that you discovered you loved it.
Yeah.
Okay. So far we have a 9, a 9.5, a 7.75, and a 7. So Dad, you are the high man, and Trent, you are the low man on this one. Fight.
I just
I
don't
mean that obviously metaphorically, but
I don't have a whole lot of faith in the movie going public these days, so that's why I'm so down with it.
I mean, the point is taken. Although I would say again, from how the event is defined, it's still somewhat synonymous. And given the stature with which Woodward and Bernstein still kind of traipse off of their name recognition from this movie, I think that is significant.
You're right.
I think the way in which the public views Watergate, even if they've never seen the movie, is somewhat significant in how this movie is viewed because of how, the post coverage, specifically with Watergate, is always central to the storytelling of this. Somehow it is somewhat connected. And then the third point I would really make is, again, going back to how many journalists, much like political operatives are raised on the West Wing in the modern era, how many journalists didn't go to journalism school to be Woodward and Bernstein because of this movie and probably obsessively watched it? Yes, I don't think there are a lot of snotty-nosed teenagers that are watching this movie for the first time and saying, oh, I'm really psyched about Watergate. Something from 50 years ago. No, that's not likely. But
that generation who did see this movie when they were teenagers and in their 20s and their formative years, and they got this thing in their mind that they wanted to get into investigative journalism. It was very impactful. Absolutely.
Exactly. I think it has knock-on effects with how journalism coverage has been done, how we've passed on journalism, journalistic integrity, sourcing, a lot of different practices that we've done since then. It's made a lot of this process somewhat larger than life in a almost legendary status. And again, the fact that every journalism movie is measured against this, whether it be Spotlight, which wins Best Picture in a way that this one didn't, but I think most people would say is the inferior film to this one because this one creates the archetype. I don't know if I can come all the way down to somewhere near a 7. That's where I'm at. I'm willing to come down slightly, but I think there has to be somewhere of a median point on this.
No, I'm with you. I have no problem with that. As far as like me saying a 2 with this is more is saying a statement about, again, it's about the audience. But I think if people gave it a chance, I do feel like people would they would get something more out of it than what they would expect. I think.
The biggest divide is between the people in the know, in the industry, in politics, in journalism, versus the average moviegoer. That is the biggest gap. That's the biggest divide.
A 25-year-old person down in front of this movie, they're going to be bored out of their freaking minds. Because
unless you give them some context first.
Exactly. So you sit them down in the front of this movie. You got no phones, no computers, they barely have telephones, much less, a television in their.
And let's be honest, this is probably also their grandparents for most young people these days.
Totally.
Yeah. Sorry to age myself, but I also know that there are people my age who are grandparents, and I'm not even 40. So,
yeah.
But
Bob Woodward to this day, I mean, there's a reason why every time there's some sort of a scandal, if there's a tell-all about an administration, Bob Woodward's writing it. I mean, you have presidents who have every reason to hide what's going on who still talk to Bob Woodward.
Okay, but that's his personal legacy as opposed to the film's legacy. Like, you can make an argument to tie those together, but I think it's much looser than some of the other points that I've made.
Except the problem is that I don't think Bob Woodward has nearly the legacy he does, but for this movie. He became a star. He was a reporter and a good reporter, but I don't think he became a star until this movie came out.
Okay. So to cut through the scatter plot here of numbers that we have so far, the median point would be an 8.25. I will make a secondary offer of an 8.5.
I'm okay with an 8.5.
Agreeable.
Dad?
Okay. All right.
So we moved down a full point from our original score on this one. Impact and significance. Now, originally on this one, we had an 8.5, similar to the last category, now that we have that final score. But the impact and significance is usually a measurement within the first 5 years after a film comes out on how impactful it is generally, again, between the industry and the audience at large. This can have many different things associated with it, such as awards attention. It can have the career paths of the people that were involved and how they made bigger strides in their careers associated with this. It can have associations with the box office number. So it can mean a few different things that we have associated with this over time. Now, again, we had an original 8.5 on this score. Dad, did we get this right or wrong?
I had it right. Looking back at how it impacted and what took place and how society as a norm considered it, there were excerpts from this film that were used by Rich Little and David Fry, who were two of the most renowned impressionists of the time. They were using lines from the film for their impressions. And so I just think it had a real cultural impact. The fact that it took a relatively mundane news story and made it into a movie that had a real plot was significant. I think in Dustin Hoffman's career, continued on an upward trajectory as a result of it. I think Robert Redford, as a producer, advanced, coming up with the idea of buying the script early on in the process, wanting to do the story. I just thought it meshed.
I mean, I'm slightly higher than the original score. On an industry perspective, it would be hard to say that this didn't supplement several of the people's careers that it's associated with. Robert Redford, this is probably his most famous film, just generally. And that's kind of saying something, given that he's associated with several fairly well-regarded, well-publicized films. The Sting, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But I think this is probably his seminal work. Now, he uses the clout that he gets from this movie, casting himself, producing the movie, this being somewhat of his baby, to kind of getting ordinary people off the ground, which he eventually wins his Oscar for as Best Director. And by happenstance, I mean, I think this is the last great Pakula film of the 70s, but he had done a lot of good work coming into this. It's another furtherance of Gordon Willis's amazing 70s run. I mean, you want to talk about one of the great cinematography runs of all time, you talk about Gordon Willis in the 70s. Goldman gets his second Oscar, and he probably is the most famous screenwriter until maybe Aaron Sorkin now, just generally from a Hollywood perspective. I think Dustin Hoffman becomes much more of a household name, and it kind of launches him into the 80s, where he's got some even the late 70s, where he's got Kramer versus Kramer, eventually Tootsie, and he wins the Oscar for Rain Man again. I think he kind of goes to a different plateau with this film. And I think also it can't be understated that for a journalism film about an event that everybody was living through at the time, that had just, for the most part, finished, this was the number 6 grossing film in the United States in the year that it came out. So either this was one of the most fascinating things to ever come out in theaters, or it was just a really good film that people enjoyed. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't going to do Rocky numbers, because Rocky was this huge phenomenon, which is probably why it won Best Picture. But, I mean, number 6 for this kind of film that's so dense on a lot of information and other stuff that people kind of already knew, I think that's still overperforming kind of its particulars. So I have a 4 for the industry on a kind of a weird basis that, while it helped a lot of people's careers, it was more of a crowning achievement for several of them than propping them forward, as well as the fact that it got fairly minor Oscars attention. It got nominated for a lot of things, but didn't win some of its bigger prizes. So it wasn't at the moment, everybody thought this was the best film of that particular year. And I have a 5 for the audience because I thought this was impactful at the time. Again, creating the narrative, the final say on how Watergate was perceived in the moment, I think is a big deal. So I have a 9.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question just because you're right. You think about the fact that they put this entire movie together less than 2 years after everything went down with Watergate. Nixon resigns and they're like, quick, make a movie about it. And it ends up actually being a really, really good movie that people actually went to see. And clearly this was an immediacy to this topic, given the fact that it was up against Network, another movie about journalism and integrity and, how the audience perceives it. They're very different sides of the same coin when you're looking at these two movies. I think you're probably in the right ballpark with 8.5. Industry. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it really changed significantly. You're right. Dustin Hoffman maybe became more of a household name, but it's not like he was an unknown by this point. He'd already made The Graduate. He'd already made Little Big Man, and he'd made all of these things in the early 70s. So he was an established star. Robert Redford was an established star. They went on to make more good movies. It's just another good movie in their catalog of great movies. So I'm okay with like a 4.5 for the industry, and I'll go with a 4 for audience, just because, again, I think maybe it's more the way you watch movies is different now than it was then. And if it played for a significant amount of time, it's because people kept going back to see it. And it's much of a slower burn, and it's harder to gauge the immediacy of it. But it's the fact that people kept going back to see it, or bringing friends to see it, bringing family to see it, and introducing them in the 1970s the way I introduced Trent to it, where he missed it the first time around, but somebody welcomed him into the fold. That's how I would interpret it. So I think I'll stick with a 4.5 and a 4 for that.
Yeah, I think you probably had it right the first time. I feel like this movie is more, at the time, a supplement to what was going on at the time in the news. So 74, everything kind of breaks, and we're done with Nixon and we're moving on. However, there's still a story to be told about the storytellers. So they didn't get their story told. Woodward and Bernstein were not out on, cable television every night talking to Jake Tapper. They're not on the evening news talking to Walter Cronkite. They're doing the work. They don't have the kinds of outlets to get their faces out there like they would now. So as far as a score, and for the industry, you guys are going to know a lot more about that stuff than I do, but for the time, yes, I agree. I would say all these actors who were in this, all the producers who were in this, it had something to do with it. They all continued on with their career. Nobody kind of crapped the bed for anything here. If anything, it maybe gave a little bit more credence to just make it, like, they proved that they could do a journalism movie. And that's, in 1970, whatever, the thought of doing that is just beyond. But because this was such a large story and everybody was following it, whether they supported Nixon or not, everybody was following what was happening. So I would definitely give this I give it a 4.5 for industry. As far as audience, I would give it a 4.
Well, that makes me the one outlier, so I'm not going to protest. Since it's 3 against 1, I'll concede to the 8.5. All right. So that takes us then to Novelty. Now, Novelty, I've been splitting recently between the originality of the idea of the story, or maybe some of the concepts, and as well as an execution basis. And so with that, I will split that here as well. From an originality standpoint, again, we've talked about the fact that this is fresh in people's minds at the time that it was made. Is it the first journalism movie? No, but it's probably the first serious journalism movie. One of the points that Dana made on our original episode I actually thought was important is a lot of the movies about journalism coming into this were defined by somewhat of the, like, His Girl Friday aspect. It was very comedic and kind of slapsticky in that way. So the shift to something where it's like true reporting, somebody that's doing a gumshoe type of thing, putting in the shoe leather, focusing on the reporting aspect, the day-to-day, the mundane, I think is somewhat novel. But it's based on a lot of events and a lot of material that preceded it, that was fresh in people's minds. So I can't give it a full 5. I have it actually at a 3.5 for the originality of the concept. But, and this is where I think I might be different than probably the most of you, I think this one might be one of the best executed movies of all time, and that's why this movie is important. They reconstructed an entire replica set of the Washington Post on a set. Like, they didn't rent out the Washington Post, but they recreated it. They got actors who, almost to a T, are embodiments of the characters themselves. From Jason Robards doing Ben Bradley to Hal Holbrook doing Mark Felt, even though he didn't necessarily know it at the time, to Redford doing Woodward, even though he's a more handsome version of Woodward. I mean, let's be honest, it's like Brad Pitt doing you in the movie of your own life kind of thing. But the cinematography from the tracking shots that they have throughout the entire film, where Gordon Willis is putting different track sets in the middle of this gigantic set, and then they're doing these like racing versions of things, or the weird camera shots that are so iconic of them panning up through the Library of Congress, or doing the helicopter shot across DC, et cetera, et cetera. And you could go down the line of things that I think are exceptional in this movie, whether it's acting, direction, etc. So I have an 8.5, which is the exact score we originally had.
So this one's a little bit hard for me, and I think it's because we mentioned earlier, we have not seen a ton of movies from the 70s. So putting it in the context of what else was happening around this time, it's a little hard for me to gauge the novelty of this. I do agree with you that just knowing movies that exist, having a true dramatic journalism movie of this kind was probably pretty unique. For it to be really good and people to like it was also pretty unique. Is it doing anything that is, completely different and out of left field? Like the thing about building a set, I didn't know that. I would not have looked at this and gone, it's so original and unique because they rebuilt the set, because I just don't have that context. So I probably can't give it as higher rating just because I don't have that information. Not to knock it or anything, I just don't have the context. So, I mean, for novelty, I'll give it a 7 overall. I don't even know how to break that down, just because I think my score for me personally is just going to be lower because I don't have context for anything else that came before it and the things that came since.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at this movie and putting it in context of when it came out, what they were able to do with like that set. I have read some stuff about that set, and I think other journalism movies have tried to imitate that entire vibe. I wrote down in my notes while we were watching it last night, or when I was watching it last night, that it just seems so natural. Everybody who is in this room is doing stuff over there in the background. They're watching whatever news is happening on here. And then we also have the main characters in focus and in frame here, where they're just doing the work. People, they show these guys being called back to the office how many times in this movie. And that's just what you do when you get called into the office by your boss. So the feeling of them doing the work, I feel like, is a very novel thing, because why would you ever care about a journalist making, cold calls to people and them actually picking up the phone and them for just happening upon this information because, oh, didn't you go with a guy, didn't you date this guy years ago? Oh yeah, he did this. Okay, well, let's do this. Just making the connections in your brain that a non-journalist would never do. So making that interesting, I think, is the most novel thing here. So if I'm going to give this a score, I'm going to give this probably an 8.
Okay, so we have an 8.5, a 7, and an 8 so far.
Hesitate with the 8.5 only because I think it might be low. In context, I have watched a lot of films. Growing up with it from my dad on, watching 60s, 70s films when they were on network TV, etc. And there's just nothing like this. It's completely original and based on fact. There's not anything in here that it's,
not
true. The underlying facts of the film are not necessarily embellished.
There is one scene that is additive and completely fictional.
And that is
when Hoffman goes to Florida.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the scene that he and his wife at the time, who obviously went on to her own career in film, wrote specifically for this movie as a treatment outside of the Goldman script so that they could insert it and make Bernstein much more of the hero of the film. But that was the only scene that they used, but it's completely fictional.
Yeah. All right. I almost should go to a 9 for that reason. The execution has been phenomenal because it was dead on. The paranoia, the apprehension of witnesses talking, the desire for certain people within the administration to want to talk, but not knowing whether they should talk. I would normally go with a 9 on this and think we were under, but I'll stay with my 8.5 for the purposes of at least discussing where we should be.
So that means we have two 8.5s, an 8, and a 7. So how steadfast are you on your 7?
I have no qualms about people going higher because, as I said, mine is just personally, I don't know how to rate it higher because I don't have the context to justify rating it higher. But
so you gave out a number in order to abstain, essentially?
No, it's just genuinely how I feel because I don't have the context. And I think a lot of people who watch this movie are probably like me, where they don't have the context. So I don't think it's unfair to say when we're talking about the greatest movies of all time, most people are going to be like me. And I actually know a lot about movies, and I still don't know a lot about this. So I don't think it's unfair.
Somebody might think, oh, yeah, they used to make a whole lot of journalism movies back in the 70s.
But I am okay to hear arguments. And I'm hearing what you're saying, and higher is also fine with me because the rest of the group is leaning higher.
Really, the difference in this seems to be, are we closer to an 8 or an 8.5?
I would be okay with higher. I would be okay with the 8.5. The more I hear people talk, the more I hear, I don't really remember a whole lot of these interview scenes in somebody's home and them not really wanting to talk, and these journalists are getting it out of them just by continuing to be in their presence. It's something you don't really see a lot of.
I guess if I were to try and solidify the 8.5, we've talked a few times, and it's been mostly me, I'll grant you that, but how this created the archetype for the modern journalism film. And as such, I think that deserves a little bit more weight on that side of the scale. I mean, again, an 8.5 is not a 10. Like, we're not arguing grandiose numbers here, but I think an 8.5 is probably fitting based on the context of the time. So if we're all okay with that, that will be our third consecutive 8.5.
I'm fine with this.
Okay. So with that looks like a good spot for our second break, and we'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, as of this last month, all of our episodes are also now in video format. That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous okays in pristine high definition. So far, we have 10 different episodes now available to watch. Just head to youtube.com/@GModePodcast, or I have the full video and audio feeds on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GModePodcast. Both of those are in the episode description of this episode, so check us out there. And if you do, please like the video or subscribe to us. We would really appreciate it. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Fortunately, no.
Okay, so let's move on. We left off at Classicness was the last category before we took a break. Now, originally on our Classicness for this in the original episode, we had a 9.25. This is the most amorphous character. This is the most amorphous category we have for this entire show. It takes on a host of different things, but since this is not a comedy, and it has nothing about the temperament or emotion of something, you might be able to say the historical context, but we usually leave that to a legacy perspective than we do associate it with classicness. So mostly this category is about how well it has aged or not. I will make my opening salvo that I think this movie is somewhat timeless, that you could watch it in most eras and get something out of it. However, for a millennial that has never lived without the internet, or really at any point where there wasn't Google or smartphones, this might seem prehistoric. And so, while I will give it points up for being maybe not ahead of its time, but of its time, and kind of setting the tone again for what a journalism movie in the modern context we would understand and appreciate. While we had a 9.25 on this originally, I sit at a 9 because the technology and the ways of doing things are arcane. So, Dad, you got a kick out of my commentary there. What say you? Did we get this right or wrong?
I'm still in the days where when I was in the first couple of law firms, we had a whole shelf or shelves full of phone books so that we could find people and get phone numbers and locate people, because that's all the resources we had. So, but I'm going to go at this with a little lower number than even you. I'm going to go with an 8.75. When I'm watching this film, it's quaint. When you think of what was an absolute horrible experience and a gut-wrenching moment in American history, it seems relatively quaint compared to where things are over the last 20 to 30 years. And so I have to give it marks down for that. I think it's a great film under the context, but realistically, I just don't think it hits the mark anymore, because people are going, that's what you were worried about when we had this?
In the context that your political opponent is allegedly sabotaging you as opposed to an opposing government, yes, it is quaint. All right. To our guests, who I will almost guarantee are lower than I am on this particular category, as they have been underwriting me all evening. What will I have to negotiate down to?
Honestly, on this one, I might surprise you. When you're talking about it feeling really dated because it's typewriters and stuff, I'm more bothered in movies by big brick cell phones when it's in like the 90s than I am in the context of this movie where they have rotary phones and typewriters, because it is of the time. It is period accurate. So that does not bother me. Honestly, I'm inclined to agree with you on a 9, simply because there is still... It's a good movie. It's a really good movie. And if you can get people to pay attention long enough to just give it a chance, and if you have interest in all of these topics, I think you're going to walk away from it going, that's a really good movie. Even 50 years removed, just about, I don't think there's anything in it that is offensive. There's nothing in it that I feel like makes you go, ugh, what? Why is that in this movie? There's really, to me, no context about that suddenly like throws me completely out of the context of the movie and ruins something for me. So I'm still going to rank it high. Yes, I have been going lower the rest of the night, but as far as an all-time classic movie, Classicness is where I will give you a higher score, because we wouldn't keep talking about this movie if it wasn't a classic. If we were just leaving it in the dust and not moving on from it, it wouldn't be a classic. So I'm sticking with a 9. I'll go with you on this, Tom.
Good. Feel the power of the dark side.
I agree with the quaintness of the scandal of what they are covering here. But that's beyond what this movie actually is. I think what I said before about, you set a 20-year-old in front of this movie and they are going to think that this is maybe the most boring thing without context. But if you try to give them what was going on in the country, what the mindset was, this is a betrayal. This is one of the highest betrayals you could ever do on behalf of your own country. And it was a big deal, and to try to impart that to a younger person is a challenge. But I think the movie nails it because they are so steadfast in their commitment to this thing that they are doing. They're not doing it for their own glory. They're not doing it for any kind of other personal things other than continuing their career. They legitimately know that what these guys did was wrong, and they were pursuing it to the nth degree. So I'm going to agree. I'm actually going to give this a 9.5. Yeah.
One of the things I want to point out is that about half of the country thought the government had been lying to them for decades. It was about the Vietnam War. And half of the country said there's no way the government would do this. And now all of a sudden we've got proof that the government was lying at least about something. So now I think it jumped the needle. I think it made it legitimate that the government actually does lie to us. And I think that's ultimately what made this scandal so viable and so poignant.
And not just this scandal, but this entire era of government.
Yeah, I would say that this is the era in which, like, the true form of conspiracy theory is born. I mean, we haven't talked about it tonight. Pakula, the director of the film, this is the third in his quote-unquote paranoia trilogy. Now, I have yet to see Clute, but I did see the Parallax View a couple of months ago for a discussion group that I have. But this is the first one. Like, Clute and Parallax View are fictitious stories. This is the first one where it's actually rooted in something and gives some additional credence to what the feeling was generally. Because, and we also have kind of beaten around it, this is the second almost consecutive the government is lying to you big scandal in short order. The Pentagon Papers and now Watergate. And so with both of those connected, feeding a frenzy of the aspect of the time, I mean, the median point is basically a 9, but I have no qualm with going up. So since both of our guests have moved up, I mean, we can meet you where you're at. Dad, do you really have a problem going higher?
No, I don't.
So where do we want to stop this, the wheel here? Is it going round? What are you comfortable with, Dad?
I don't know. I mean, I came down. 9.5 was original.
Yeah, 9.25 was the original score on this.
I don't know, 9.25.
Which one?
9.
Okay, so he wants to go with a 9. 9 seems to be the median point. I'm not going to argue against it. I think everybody's comfortable with a 9.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we moved down a 0.25, but honestly, that, you know, we've been pretty close with most of our numbers all night to the original episode, which is unusual. Normally we have it like either like seriously off one way or the other. All right, rewatchability on this one. Let's give it to the Watergate superfan. Let's let you lead off, Pop.
I'm going to be honest. Having watched it, this is one that I regularly watch about once a year, if not more. Okay. The last time I watched it, having been through the politics that we've been through over the last 8 years, 10 years, it's becoming rather quaint. It's almost becoming rather blasé. So I actually went down a little bit. I went from, we had an 8.5 if I remember right. I went with an 8.
Our original rewatchability on this was a 8.75. You're going to an 8?
Yeah. Simply because maybe it's just I'm worn out by the politics that we've had to endure over the last decade.
Too close to home.
Yeah. I'm just having a hard time, wanting to watch it. Maybe that's my problem.
Okay, I'm going to hold my thoughts till the end here. let's go to the other political obsessive here, Trent.
I'm kind of with you there, Dana. I kind of long for the time when this is the biggest story in the world rather than the biggest story in the world happening once a week and just moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Remember this summer? How it's just still wrapping up all the things that have happened?
Indeed.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of there with you. Betsy and I have the hotel quotient. I don't know if that's the official title or not.
The hotel test.
It's the hotel test. If you are in a hotel room, like we don't have cable TV. So if you're in a hotel that has cable and you're flipping through channels, it's 8:00 at night, you're just trying to kill time before you go to sleep. If you come across this movie, will you watch it? And I'm having a hard time saying yes to this movie. I love this movie. I absolutely adore this movie. I've seen it a dozen times or more.
And you personally watch it a lot.
I do. But is it something that I am going to just stop on if there's nothing else? Sure, why not? But is this going to be my first choice? No. But that being said, I think it's an 8. Betsy, you're next.
I'm hearing sighs and I'm getting scared to speak.
Oh, no, don't.
Okay, so I think that there are some movies like this that are really hard to get through, that you're not going to... If you get through it once, you might go, okay, I've seen it. I don't need to see it again. It's good, whatever, move on with your life. I think this movie is rewatchable. I think because it's a classic, because it's so well constructed, because the actors are good and charismatic, and the script is really good, and the suspense is really good, it is definitely something that can be rewatched. I'm not like you where the current political climate makes me less excited to watch it. I just don't. There's so many movies in my life that I don't think I'm going to wake up this morning and watch All the President's Men. That's not one that is at the forefront of my mind. And I think I'm probably erring more towards the average moviegoer. But I think overall, the hotel thing, I'm with you. I'm not going to stop and watch it. I might stop and watch a few minutes. I'm not going to sit and watch it. I'll keep switching the channel. Like if it's in a good part or something.
Yeah, if they get to one of the parking lot scenes, I'm going to watch that. Yeah, 100% of the time.
You might give it 10 minutes, but then I'm switching the channel. So I'll probably go just I'm debating.
So just to help you out a little bit.
Okay.
This is how I have it broken down. We have our Kieran B test, which is very similar to your hotel test, except it splits the category in 2 sets of 5. Would I put this on of my own volition? At which point I would think that once a year is probably about, in that avenue, but like 5 is I put it on when I'm sick because I'm so familiar with the movie, but I need something comfortable to kind of do because in case I fall asleep, it doesn't matter when I wake up, I'll know exactly where I am in the movie. I've just watched it that many times. And where you're sitting at is the leaving it on. Now, would I watch it for a few minutes if it were on somewhere? Yes, you've already said that. But you're not stopping your day and you're not making a plan to watch it later. That's roughly where I have as a 4. 5 is I'm stopping my day and I watch it then and there and that's it. Like, if this comes on, that's what I'm doing for the next hour and a half, no matter where it is in the movie. So does that help at all?
Yes, I think so. I'll be generous because I know I am not the person who's going to put this movie on a lot, but I will put it on without being prompted. So I'll go a little lower than Trent. I'm going to say 7.75.
Coming out with the decimals. All right.
I'm going to make you math tonight because I don't want to go a whole lot lower, but I just don't think I can go as high as Trent because he has so much more drive to just watch this. The number of times I come home and he's just in the middle of watching this or Spotlight or some other journalism movie for the umpteenth time. And that's not me, and I know that about myself.
I'm changing mine to 8.1.
Don't do that.
No.
He's already mathed it.
So where I'm sitting on this one, I'll be quite honest, this is like just short of a sick movie for me. Like it's very comfortable. It's very easy to watch. I was so like spent on Friday when I needed something to put on. I'm like, I don't mind watching this movie. It's like 10:30 at night. I haven't really eaten yet. So let's throw this on, have a very late dinner. Not good, but, I did it anyway. Because I apparently, that's what you do in law school, I guess. You don't take care of yourself and you're not having the most healthy habits, but you do it anyway. And I look up and I'm like, I wonder what time it is. There was 20 minutes left in the movie. And again, this is a 2-hour and 10-minute film. And I'm like, oh, I've watched this for like an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, and I didn't realize it. I should probably go to bed because it's like 12:30. So I just kind of lost myself in the movie a little bit, but it's not quite I'm stopping and watching it whenever it's on. Like, it's pretty close, but not quite. So, you know what? Screw it. If it's on, I'm probably stopping and watching it. So, unlike my father, but since he's passed it on to me, I have a 9.5. So I'm just going to average the scores since we're all very different. We won't have to negotiate this one since it's a very subjective category. That comes down to an 8.31. So yes, I did have to math.
By the way, I'll tell you the other habits that happen while you're in law school.
Are you sharing those now or are you withholding them?
I'll do it off camera.
I see. Okay.
If anybody would like to ask Dana anything, I'll be glad to share. But until you do,
that's just a wormhole of terrible decisions. Please do not ask about law school and his experiences in law school, but I digress. So to recap the categories on this one, our original score on Legacy was a 9.5. We went to an 8.5. We left Impact and Significance and Novelty alone. Both were at their original scores of 8.5. For Classicness, we went from a 9.25 to a 9. For Rewatchability, we went from an 8.75 to an 8.31. And on audience score, this moved from just the 9.2 for the 92% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes when we did this originally. We've now added in our Google scores, which unfortunately was a 75. I don't understand why that's so low, but that drops it from a 9.2 to an 8.35. Our original score on this one was a 53.7, and it is currently number 11 on our master list. And our new final total will be 51.16, and currently placing it on our list between Network and Ocean's 11 at number 42. So it drops one spot below Network, which I think is about right.
Yeah. That's appropriate.
I think Network is actually the more profound and prescient and holds up better film.
That is weird that they are next to each other on the list, given they came out the same year and they were both in the same category for Best Picture.
Well,
I'll say this, though. If you are presenting me one of these movies or both of these movies, I'm picking Network.
Yeah. I mean, I can't go wrong with either one. I like to watch this one more often, but I think Network is the better movie.
We've only seen Network once, so
I have a hard time with Network simply because it makes me cringe more and regret the fact that I held stock in News Corp for a long time.
But it's funny, though, that you say that it's weird that two movies from the same year are right next to each other like that. Because the last revisit we did, we just barely bumped Do the Right Thing ahead of When Harry Met Sally, both from the same year of 1989. So back-to-back episodes, we have some symmetry going on in a particular year. If you have any disagreements with any of our scoring, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of our socials at GMOT Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok. Or you can find us on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOT Podcast. Let's move to remaining questions for this one. We've kind of already generally answered this question throughout the night, but if you didn't know anything about Watergate, can you follow this movie?
I think you can kind of, but it's going to require a lot more attention because they are throwing names and people and job titles and organizations at you so fast, left and right. And unless you are also scribbling in pen and trying to keep along with their notes, it's a little hard. It's a hard to digest film. But I think, like Trent said, if you go into it with like a little bit of a heads up, like this is what the movie is. Don't get too hung up on exactly what everybody's names is. Just know how they fall in the puzzle. I think you can still enjoy this movie.
I mean, I said it before that for the most part, up until probably the last few years, I didn't know a lot of the names and the context with which they meant something in the investigation portion of this. It's only through other material and other stuff that has come out that it makes more sense, like who John Mitchell is and why he's exactly important and what his relationship is to all of this stuff, or E. Howard Hunt, or, any of these cast of weirdos that was a part of this entire investigation. But that didn't mean that I still didn't really enjoy the film. I just seemingly enjoy it a little bit more now with some of the added context where, oh, this all makes sense in the context of, okay, yeah, now I understand who this guy is. And yep, I know why he's involved. All right. I mean, there's still some names that you don't necessarily understand unless you're like really in the weeds with this stuff. But for the most part, I think because, again, the focus is on the reporting as opposed to the actual story itself, it makes it better or easier for the audience at large, and why this movie, I think, is held up as well as it has.
I think you could retool this movie and take all the names out of it. You could make a fictionalized version of this movie by just having the titles of all of the White House people, the committee to reelect, all this other stuff. You can make a different movie and just replace all the names with fictional people. And I think it would still work because it's how it is presented. It is this almost spy movie because they're working in the darkness. There's people following them. They're in danger. They're talking to people in parking ramps.
They're being
in the middle
bugged.
of the night.
I think they might be bugged.
Yeah. So think about it as a movie itself, a genre film, and not based on a real life. And it's still a great movie.
It's a good point.
Yeah, if it wasn't executed as well as it is, it would be a lot harder to
It's
digest.
not a history lesson.
No. It would be really dry. If it was a less well-made movie, we would have left this in the dirt years ago and moved on.
The analogy I'll provide is my wife, who I love and is a very intelligent, educated woman, but she is not into the same tubs
macro history
that I am. Okay. And when I was watching this on Friday afternoon, she came into the sunroom where I was watching it, where our TV is at home, and said, "Is this your movie for the week?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, well, I like this movie. I would watch it again with you if you wanted me to." I said, "Oh, well, if I'd have realized that, I would have waited, but I didn't figure you would." She said, "No, it's a good film." So that in and of itself, she knows. The only thing she really knows about Watergate is that it was involved in conspiracy and a cover-up, and Nixon left office on her birthday.
Is this the best cast film of the 1970s? I know we haven't really talked about casting much in this discussion tonight, but
ask us again in another 300 episodes after we've covered a lot of other 70s movies, and we'll have a better answer for you.
My first instinct is probably not, but
it's pretty damn good.
There's a lot of movies I have not seen.
Well, I say from a casting perspective, and part of the idea of asking this question is that you got a lot of the supporting characters really well done. I mean, yes, you have the star power of Hoffman and Redford, but down to the granular, like Jane Alexander is a really good casting to be making like 5, 6, 7 spots down the cast list. So to have Jason Robards and Martin Balsam and Jack Warden, like veteran character actors involved and very closely like well cast to the people they were actually portraying, but just good actors fundamentally. Like, I don't know if I would say this is the best cast, but it's top 10 of the 70s. Like, other ones that I would potentially put in there, the original Godfather. It's hard to compete with the lineup that you have for the original Godfather as far as just a casting lineup of who's who of people that were in that film. Duvall and, eventually for part 2, De Niro, but Pacino and Khan. And so it's got a long list of really great people in that film. And I'm sure because the 70s is just long for, how many great classic films that we had, that there's bound to be several other films that people are going to be screaming into their computer and as they're watching this on YouTube that you're forgetting this film. But it's to raise the question of like, what is the best cast film? And now, especially that we're going to have a casting director Oscar, not this coming year, but the year after, I believe.
Yes. And we
should be considering this more.
I think it depends how you define it too, because you look at The Godfather and it's like Oscar winner, future Oscar winner, huge director. It's just like bam, bam, bam. This one might be better as far as, literally 4 days ago, I found out F. Murray Abraham was in this movie because he's under a bucket hat and he's got a mustache and he's barely recognizable because nobody knew who he was in 1976. But he went on to win an Academy Award, and somebody somewhere saw something in him to give him a role in this movie. And you're right, when you look at the overall, like, minor characters, collectively, maybe that is a better casting group than just slamming a bunch of megastars in a room together.
Remember, though, F. Murray Abraham also, in between this film and his Academy Award, was the bunch of grapes and the Fruit of the Loom underwear commercials.
I also did not know that.
Yeah.
So a couple other potential ones to throw out there. I know Dad won't have any disagreement with me nominating The Sting for possibly best casting of the 70s. The Deer Hunter, top to bottom, has a great cast list as well. So, I mean, there are several choices, but I'm just throwing the question out. So any remaining questions for any of you?
No, I don't think so. This is the nice thing about this one is any mystery that there is.
Yeah.
We're so far removed from this now is all those mysteries have been revealed. Like, we didn't know who Deep Throat was in 1976, but we know now.
Wow.
I mean, it's not the JFK assassination, so
No.
Yeah.
This is fairly easy to know. There's been a lot of history written on this particular event and continues to be.
Yeah, I think there's very little in here that people are still wondering about. I think by the end of the lives of anybody who was involved in this, any other remaining secrets will be revealed.
Yeah. Especially
there
as
aren't that many
I think
people
most of them
left in the
That's
whole
what
thing.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So soon.
And if anybody had anything to say, they've said it.
most likely, yeah. But I will thank our guests again for being on with us and just remind everybody what you're doing and where they can find you.
Well, we are Never Seen It with Betsy and Trent on podcast services worldwide. We are a movie reaction podcast. The one rule about our podcast is one or both of us cannot have seen the movie we're about to cover. We will sit down, talk about the movie, about what we know about the movie before we go and watch it. We talk about it a little bit. We take a pause, go and watch it, and then come back and react to it.
And yeah, we do that all in one sitting. We don't take days in between.
Yep.
We don't have time to like research and prepare. It is genuinely, this is what I'm feeling right now after we finished it.
So if we are watching a movie on a Tuesday night, we will probably start around 7:00. We'll do our intro. We'll watch the movie. We'll come back and sit down here, do the remainder of the episode, and that's our night.
Yeah. So we'll talk about it from anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours. It kind of depends. But you can find us again on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram. Instagram is Never Seen a Pod 1.
Yep.
Twitter,
Never
X, whatever you want to call it.
Never Seen It _pod.
And our social media profiles are linked on those accounts. So if you want to follow us personally, you can do it there.
Yeah, and episodes come out once every Sunday. We also have a Patreon where we have 4 other shows. Of course, patreon.com/neverseenitpod.
Great. And again, for anyone that is looking for them, the links to all of their various places will be available both on the website and in the episode description of this episode. Dad, any remaining thoughts for the week?
No, I have cut from satellite television, which was my DirecTV, to streaming. The streaming app for DirecTV, which was a lot cheaper than my satellite, allows me unlimited number of films to record and save for up to 9 months. And I believe I am now approaching 400 films that I have saved off of HBO, Cinemax, and Stars, Turner, etc. So your mother and I have been watching a film or two a night, and we're doing more so while we're on vacation.
What a time to be alive.
Yes, it's quite good. We just finished a Cary Grant film from 1953 I'd never heard of. It was actually rather an enjoyable film. Room for one more.
So as for me, I don't really have a whole lot of time to do much fluff these days. As many of you know, that I have just started law school, so the time commitments for that, even at a part-time basis, while also working a full-time job, are not much. With that being said, I am starting my prep for our 1967 episode of the Revisionist Almanac that we have coming up, and I'm trying to get that 2 months in advance because it's going to probably take me that long to get through the 20 films that are on my absolutely need to see for the show list, and then the various 15 to 20 of the other ones, I may fill in with some of those. So among those that I will be watching, Cool Hand Luke, The Graduate, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, The Dirty Dozen. Just a bevy of films in a particularly good film year. So you will be able to catch that here in comes out in December. So it'll be the final episode of their first season. But we are preparing in advance for that, or at least I am. I don't know if Dad has started the prep work yet, but given the nature of how hurried our 1942 episode, which will be coming out here shortly, was, I think that getting ahead of the game is probably a better strategy.
We will be on the 1976 episode for them.
Oh, so this was
You're going to hear us talk about this again.
Yep.
I won't be disappointed.
Yes, I'm waiting for you to get to Dr. Doolittle.
Yes, the famous Dr. Doolittle, the 5th nominee in a particular year that is so long, apparently it had an intermission. Yeah, that's going to be fantastic.
Yes. It was a really great film when I was about 7.
But anyway, that'll do it for us this evening. Thank you for listening. What's the matter? Oh, you were finished? Well, allow me to retort. What does Marcellus Wallace look like? Next week, for our 227th episode, we welcome back Adam Freed from Movie Archer to revisit yet another top film on our current list, and one of the few episodes that Dana was not on. Pulp Fiction from 1994. Written and directed by Quentin Tarantino, starring John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Uma Thurman, Harvey Keitel, Christopher Walken, and Bruce Willis. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.